Hi everyone, I'm Preeti Ars from the Indo-American Arts Council. We're a 21-year-old cultural organization centered in New York City. We are dedicated to promoting the arts and artists of Indian heritage, showcasing the performing, visual, and literary arts. Our festival this year runs from December 4th through the 12th, and we invite you to join in our great book selection and be part of conversations that will endure. Today, it is my special pleasure to introduce Farzana Doctor, a Toronto based author of 4 novels. Her novels are Stealing Nasreen, 6 Meters of Pavement, All Inclusive, and Seven. Seven was chosen for many 2020 best book lists and shortlisted for the Trillium and Evergreen Awards. Her poetry collection, You Still Look the Same, will be released in May 2022. Farzana is also the Marcy behind Dear Marcy, a new sex and relationships column for FGM survivors. She is also an activist and part-time psychotherapist. Welcome, Farzana. It is also my pleasure to welcome moderator Veena Rao. Veena Rao is an award-winning journalist and author. Purple Lotus, her recently released debut novel, is a 2021 Georgia Author of the Year finalist, a 2021 American Fiction Award winner, and an award-winning finalist in the Multicultural and Women's Fiction categories of 2021 International Book Awards. She is the founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of NRI Pulse, an Atlanta-based news publication. She has been recognized by the Limca Book of Records, which is the Indian Guinness Book of Records, as the first Indian woman to edit and publish a newspaper outside India. When she is not writing or meeting press deadlines, you will find her meditating or photographing the flora and fauna on her wooded walk route. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel. Welcome, Farzana and Veena.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Preeti, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having us on this literary festival. It's a pleasure to be here. I had the pleasure of interviewing Farzana last year after reading her powerful and beautiful book, Seven. And then we got on a couple of panels, and since then we've been very supportive of each other in our literary journeys. And so it gives me great pleasure to continue our conversation. Let's begin by talking a little bit about the book, Seven. Seven is a sensitively told story of a woman who travels to India to research the legend of her great-great-grandfather, but unexpectedly discovers and must confront a shocking truth about her own past. Crafted around the theme of Khatna, or female genital mutilation, the novel is insightful, educational, and deeply, deeply engrossing. So Farzana, let's talk about the themes of the book first. Like I just mentioned, the theme of Seven is Khatna, or female genital mutilation. What was the inspiration for this theme, and why did you want to address these issues?
Thank you so much, Veena. I'm so glad that you've been able to moderate this, and I wanted to say also a thanks to the IAAC as well, and to Preeti. It's such a pleasure to be with you. So the inspiration came because in 2015, I became involved with a group called We Speak Out, and it was an initiative led by a woman named Masuma Rinaldi. And at the end of 2015, this was a time when the issue of Khatna, or female genital cutting, was just coming into mainstream discourse in India. Of course, people talked about it a little bit before then, but it became part of the mainstream conversation. And so 2 activist groups sprung up around that time, and I got very involved in it. And I wasn't doing much writing in that moment because I was promoting my 3rd novel, but each morning I found myself getting up, and these fully formed fictional scenes were just sort of arriving, which is one of the best ways for fiction to come, right? We love it when that happens.
Yeah.
So I just sat down, with my diary, 15 minutes with my coffee and wrote these scenes. And by the time I had about 20 of these scenes, I, put them, into my laptop, and I realized that I had the makings of a novel. But, there was a part of me that didn't want to write this book. This is a very difficult subject, so silent, so taboo. And so, I wrote it with some trepidation at the beginning. And by the time I was finished writing it, I was really clear that this was a book that I hoped would be widely read, has a lot of universal themes, but could also be part of this bigger conversation around the ending of FGMC, internationally.
Yeah, and although this is such a bold and could be a controversial theme, you've handled it with great sensitivity and balance. So kudos to you. Seven moves back and forth in time as Sharifa finds out more and more about her ancestor, her great-great-grandfather, but she also finds out a lot about her own past. So what were the challenges of writing a dual timeline narrative, and what were you trying to convey or achieve through this?
Yes, thank you. I like writing in multiple perspectives. One, because you can get a kind of a richer story, but also it gives the reader a bit of a break from the main narrative. So how this great-great-grandfather came about was through something quite personal. The year before I started writing Seven, my father had encouraged me to do some research about my own great-great-grandfather, who was a bit of a figure in our family. People know very little about him, but he was, he has this rags to riches kind of story. Went from the village of Dholka, came to Bombay, didn't have any education, and made a lot out of nothing. A lot of wealth, a lot of land holdings. Mm-hmm. I started doing some research about him, didn't find out too much. And, because I'm a fiction writer and I'm also a psychotherapist, I'm always interested in the story behind the story. I wanted to know he had 4 wives over the course of his life. I wanted to know about them. I wanted to know, what kind of man he was, what was his personality, what was his legacy, his emotional legacy. Couldn't find out any of that, of course. So I started to imagine. And so he became the inspiration for the great-great-grandfather character. And it was really fun writing him. I could take the skeleton of a story that, maybe an auntie had given me, and then turn it into something much more interesting and fun.
Yeah. So from the craft's perspective, we authors, we worry about whether, the reader will be confused with the, time frame when we work on a dual timeline story. Was that something that you worried about, or did it just flow out naturally?
It flowed out naturally, and it wasn't too much of a worry because, the main story is happening in a fairly linear way, and the short episodes where the great-great-grandfather arrives are also happening in a linear way for him. So, I could start each chapter with the year and the place to guide the reader. The other thing that was fun about writing him was that I could show some of the things that Sharifa, the main character, was trying to find but not finding. So, she might have had a question popping up in her own life. She's not answering it, but then we can find out from his perspective what's really going on.
Okay. So, Farzana, I'd like to invite you to read a passage from your book.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's give readers a little glimpse into your beautiful novel.
Thank you. So here's the cover, and here's my very messy reader copy with multiple tabs. I'll just read a short section from Sharifa's perspective, a minute or so, and then I'll slip over to her great-great-grandfather. So this is happening in 2016. Sharifa goes on a trip with her husband and daughter to India in 2016, and they spend about 9 months there. But this is just before they go. In the evening, Murtaza and I meet on the couch for the married person's evening ritual, TV. Along with a nightly bowl of microwave popcorn, we've been putting away 2 episodes of The Mindy Project after Z is in bed. We guffaw and cringe in the same places. We are diasporic South Asian children of immigrants communing over the embarrassing life of a diasporic South Asian child of immigrants. While the credits roll, Murtaza leans over, kisses my neck, and says, "Shall we turn it off now or watch another episode?" "Sure, Murthy, we can turn it off," I say, sensing his preference. After all, it is Saturday and 9 p.m. I'd prefer to hit play, to be distracted by someone else's awkward world, but I appreciate my husband's good-natured and consistent initiative taking. My friends and I talk about our lackluster sex lives and waning libidos, and I feel like I'm the lucky one amongst us. At least we can say we are still doing it, rather than being in couples therapy because we aren't, or breaking up because we aren't, or having extramarital affairs because we aren't. And I'll just switch over to a quick scene for Abdulali, the great-great-grandfather. And this is taking place in 1866 in South Bombay. 11-year-old Abdulali huddled under the yellow glow of a street lamp, his index finger pacing his labored reading. "The lion lives in the jungle," he whispered. "His roar is loud." An elderly fruit seller trudged by with an empty wooden cart pulled by a weary bullock. Just in time, Abdulali wrapped his legs around the post to avoid a heavy hoof landing on his toe. A fly, one of the bullock's many winged passengers, hopped onto his hand and then onto the Hindi primary reader he had borrowed from Sunil, the 9-year-old boy of the family for whom he worked. He told his mother it was a gift. Did she believe the lie? Thinking of her, it seemed, could summon her. He looked up and saw her face framed in the window of the 3rd-floor room they shared with another widow and her 3 young children. She fanned herself with her urna. Despite the evening's cool, the day's heat lingered in the room. He waved to her and pleaded, "5 more minutes, Mummy?" She nodded, her lips a straight line, but he knew she was proud of him, knew they had left the village for a better life, and for now, their better life was just this one nicked book about a lion in a jungle that he struggled, word by word, to understand. I'll stop there.
That was wonderful. So Abdulali's character was inspired by your own great-great-grandfather, Hussein Ali Dholkawala. I see that you have a blog dedicated to his story. And I know that you did not really find out whatever you set out to find out. But why was it important for you to find out about your ancestor?
Yeah,
and it's important for you to set up a blog in his memory.
You know, the blog was written the year before, and it was really a way to share with my family the things that I had learned, all of the interviews I had compiled with my own family. So it was just a way of putting it somewhere that would be accessible for all of them to be able to read. But I think, you know, this is a work of fiction. It's a novel. But, you know, I really embrace the fact that as novelists, we are bringing ourselves, our worlds, aspects of our families, our friends into our work. And so with him, you know, one of the questions I was trying to answer through his character was, what is the legacy that families inherit over time? And how does an ancestor who died over 100 years ago still impact the life of the contemporary person? So I was trying to answer that for myself as, just a person, but then also trying to answer it for Sharifa, the character, because, she's got her own struggles. So how would the fictional life of her great-great-grandfather have impacted this hard truth that she was trying to sort out, this truth around Khatna? So that's what that was about.
Wow. Okay. So let's move on to the setting of your novel. You were born in Zambia, and your family immigrated to Canada when you were just 5 years old. So what's it like to be a diasporic South Asian writing about an India-based setting? And I must say that your India settings are very, very authentic. The reader can feel the essence of Mumbai. What was the research process for the settings of this novel? Was it based on your visits to India, or did you live in India, or was it all research? Or what was it like?
Yeah, so, I grew up in Canada. We actually came to Canada when I was a baby. And so, and I've never been back to Zambia. Whenever we returned to the homeland, it was always returning to Mumbai because that's where my family is. We were kind of outliers going to Zambia for the 5 years my family was there. So every few years, we would make return trips to India, and, I would, soak up what I could soak up. And I had the opportunity to do 2 trips to India during the time that I was writing 7. So I really worked hard. I was carrying a notebook all the time and writing down little things that I was seeing because I knew that I wanted to blend them in. I also really listened very carefully to the ways that my family spoke. There's a different rhythm to the way that I speak in Canada and they speak in Mumbai. We all speak English together, also other languages, but there is a different rhythm. So I was really listening for all of that. So it was just trying to be very careful with the details, but also not going to the exotic. Sometimes the Western gaze wants to exoticize India. And, we know that India is a very complex place. There's, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, and then there's all kinds of other realities. And so I didn't want to be entering from like a Western gaze. So I was really perseverating a lot on settings. At the same time, the character is a Westerner. So, I did put at the forefront, her own kind of self-consciousness about being a Westerner and having a Western gaze. So I was trying not to have the Western gaze, but then also making sure to place her and position her as someone who had a Western gaze. It was a funny dance.
So, do you see a little bit of Sharifa in you?
Yeah, a little bit of her. I see a little bit more of Fatima. So she's got these 2 cousins who are really important to her story.
I wondered whether the cousins, is that her name? Fatima is the cousin. Is that aunt or the cousin? Yeah, I was wondering whether she's based on somebody or she comes as a very complex, real character in the book.
Everyone is a composite of all the people I've encountered over the years, for sure. So, but there are aspects of my story inside of Sharifa. There are aspects of how Fatima thinks, and we all have parts as human beings, and so my activist part is a bit like Fatima. Then, there's a part of Murtaza who is just like me too. So I think we bring all of our parts into our characters.
Absolutely.
And we study our relatives and friends as well to look for like their gestures and their quirks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And since we're on setting, let's talk a little bit about your writing process. Do you, people ask me what my writing process is, and I tell them that I just let my characters lead me into their lives. Are you more organized? Do you write an outline or a synopsis first, or what's your process like?
Yeah, I wish I was more organized. I write in that more free-flowing way, the way you write. It's just how I've always been. I've tried, with the other novels to try to be an outliner. I've sat in workshops where, outliners teach how they do that, and it's just never come naturally to me. So, as I mentioned before, these fictional scenes were just coming, and then I could build on them. I tend to write, I set a goal to try to write 5 new pages when I'm in that stage of the writing. And then the next day I'll go through what I've written, do a little bit of an edit, and then continue on from where I left off. And that's how I warm myself up. At some point, maybe about halfway through, I will try to write like back cover copy for myself.
Okay.
And that's
the
a way.
hardest part. That's the hardest part.
Oh, it's really hard. That's the marketing copy. But I try to write that just so I can create a really simple synopsis for myself. And that's a way of keeping me on track. So I like to know, what's this main character trying to do? What are the obstacles she's going to encounter? And where do I want her to kind of end up? And of course, all of that can change, but I do try to create that at some point so that I have a few guideposts so I'm not completely lost.
And do you set a word limit for yourself?
Generally, I set a 5-page new writing goal each day. Oh, you mean for the back cover copy?
No. I mean, every day, do you have a word limit for yourself?
Yeah, when I'm in the new writing stage, I'll aim for 5 double-spaced new pages. Yeah. But I'm also easy on myself. We can't be too rigid with ourselves.
And you also have a job. So I get that. Your next book is a book of poetry. Is the creative process different when you're writing poetry?
Absolutely, it's different. I've written poetry my whole life. I think poetry is something that is quite accessible to us as young people because it's short. Also, we're often taught, like I remember a couple of modules of poetry as I was growing up and going through, primary and middle school. So I have a different feeling about poetry. For me, poetry is much more like whimsical and open-ended and less structured. While a novel, while it is free-flowing, I do pay really close attention to pacing and how I'm going to end a chapter on a beat that would make someone turn the page. It's not formulaic in any way, but it does feel more structured. I feel like I have a lot more leeway in poetry to express myself. And I find poetry editing very difficult, much more difficult, maybe because I'm less practiced at it. In the early days of writing poetry, I didn't really edit it. I didn't really understand the editing process. But working with a poetry collection and trying to figure out the order of the poems and what even makes a poem, what makes it a successful poem, I really worked very hard. And it was a little hard. It was almost like how hard my first novel's editing process was. I just didn't have the same experience level to do it in such a easy way. Now novel writing, revision and editing is way easier. I feel like I know what I'm doing, even if I don't. But poetry, it's a bit of a churn for me. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you are the author of 4 books and a poetry book. Is that right? So do you feel like your stories choose you, or do you choose your stories?
Yeah, I think that there's a combination of both. But in the early stage of the writing, when it's the unconscious that's driving, sometimes it's been the subconscious that's been driving it. I feel like it's coming, maybe it's choosing. And then in the revision stage, I'm doing some of the choosing in terms of figuring out what stays out. And I want to give you just a couple of funny stories about this. So with my third novel, All Inclusive, I had written what I thought I wanted to write. I had a first draft. I sent it around to my writing group, to my agent, got a lot of thumbs down. They were like, this isn't working. Nobody could really tell me what exactly wasn't working. So I put it aside. I went into a really blocked place. And then one day I was teaching an emerging writers workshop. And it's in this part of town in Toronto where there's a lot of hills. And I was riding my bike home down these hills. And as I was riding, I heard this voice in my head saying, I am your missing character, and here's the missing story. Put on the brakes. And I listened and I thought, no, that doesn't fit. How am I going to do that? That's impossible. How am I going to insert you? But then I listened because I didn't know what else to do. And he ended up working. I don't know how he worked, but that's an example of it's coming, and I don't know where it's coming from. With my second novel, 6 Meters of Pavement, I had written a book that I thought that I was writing that was based on an inspiration from a news story. I started touring it. My dad lives in Texas, and I was touring in Texas. He had started reading the book, and he said to me, did your mother ever tell you about the time when you were a baby and we left you in the back seat of the car and you almost died? And of course, no one had told me that story, and I had no conscious memory of it. But that was a piece of the premise of 6 Meters of Pavement.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Subconscious memory, body
Right.
memory.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Our stories come to us in a flash sometimes, right? I was listening to Andy Williams' rendition of Moon River one afternoon, when my second novel came to me in a flash, just like that. Yes. So is that something that happened with Seven as well?
It came through these, they just this morning writing.
Okay.
It was like the character arrived, the material was there in terms of the activism, but the character and her story just sort of arrived. And will you tell us what your second novel is about? Because I know the first one.
Well, all I can tell you now is that it's about an immigrant woman, once again, as in Purple Lotus, who moves to rural Georgia. Well, that's all I can tell you for now.
Even flash. That's great.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so Farzana, what are you working on now?
Well, I have this young adult novel that my agent is trying to sell. It's inspired by one very weird year when I went off to a boarding school. Mm-hmm. And it's a little mystery, and it's like a group of racialized girls who kind of solve a mystery together. So that's something that is sort of sitting out there. And then I've also been working on, over the last couple of years, in bits and pieces. I've had multiple projects I've been working on in bits and pieces, and one of them is a kind of a self-help book that focuses on self-care, primarily for people who could be labeled caregivers in some sort of way. And I'm, picking away at that. I might have a first draft done by the new year if all goes well. And then I also had, in a flash, an inspiration for another novel, and I've written about 20 pages, and it's really, it's a newborn. I don't even know if I'll continue, but we'll see.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the mystery novel that you're working on. That's something that you've never tried before, is that right?
Yeah, it's more YA with a little hint of mystery. Okay. So it takes place in 1985 in a small town, and its setting is a boarding school. And
I love those stories. We all grew up reading Enid Blyton and Nancy Drew and all those stories. So yeah, that's something I would read.
It's told in 3 perspectives, and what was different about it was having to put myself into the mindset of a 16-year-old. I'm 50 now, so that's a long time ago, and to try to remember, like, what would a 16-year-old know about the world? How would she understand some of the things that she's encountering versus how a 50-year-old would understand things? So that was the major challenge. I really enjoyed it because, YA has the young people solving their lives and solving the mystery and making everything right versus the adults. In fact, the adults are impediments. So that kind of was fun.
Yes. Yeah. Well, good luck with your all your books, upcoming books. So since we have a little bit of time, let's dive a little bit into 7. In Sharifa, we have a very relatable protagonist who's on a mission to find out more about her ancestor and she ends up finding out about herself. So how did she come to be?
So she's just sort of arrived, and I'm not really sure how her story formed, but I had this sense of a woman whose marriage was not so stable, and I wanted her to have to transform her life and go to India for 9 months, have to sort out how she's alien to India, but also some of the trauma that she experienced when she was a child in India. So I just kind of made up this story of a woman who didn't have any memory of her trauma. That part actually was a little bit conscious. So one of the things that I had encountered in the activism was that some of the survivors had like 100% almost filmic memory of their trauma. That's often how popular media presents trauma. And then I encountered people who had 0 memory, and then people who had little flutters of memory. And I'm somebody who is in that category, little flutters of memory. So I wanted to present Katna in that way. So I have these 3 characters, and they each have different ways of remembering. They also each have different ways of perceiving the trauma, which is also really common. And people will sometimes feel quite alien from each other because they have different experiences, and you kind of think, well, I'm supposed to feel that way. How come I'm not feeling that way? So that was the psychotherapist hat in me coming in to present these characters with really differing perspectives, different experiences, and different perceptions. So that was also part of how Sharifa came to be, as someone who was pretty clueless. I also wanted her to be kind of clueless because I knew I was writing about, the Dawoodi Bohra community. This is a community that's very insular. People don't know a lot about us because of the ways that we're insular. There's kind of this ethos of like, don't rock the boat. So people don't speak up a lot. There's a lack of questioning of the religious leader as well. And if you are very open about questioning him, you can be shunned, which can have major consequences for you and your family. So I wanted to have her be someone who was a bit clueless and learning about herself, her community, so that I could present the material to non-Bohra audiences in a way that was digestible as well. So she was learning truths as the reader is learning truths.
Yeah. And how did the community respond to your book?
It's been good, I experienced to receive some backlash, and I have knockwood, and perhaps that's because maybe the pro-Katna folks haven't read my book. But of the Bohras who have read the book, I'm hearing things like, this is the first time I've really grappled with this issue myself. I'm starting to do my healing work. First time I've been able to have a conversation with my family about this issue. So really sensing like a story that is ours. Yeah.
Well, good for you. That's something that was the fear I had about my book, because I was confronting my own community as well. My character, when she confronts patriarchy, it's actually the writer also confronting her patriarchal community here in Bangalore. But thankfully for me, I'm here. I'm in Bangalore now. And the response has been pretty positive, and I think the community is changing here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's People who really appreciate your work will often tell you, and that really helps you. I think it helped me with some of the fear. I really relied on some of my activist comrades. Some of them received the book way before it came out. I got them to be beta readers because I felt like if they felt the book was good, then I could rest easy.
Yeah. And you've done a fabulous job of it. Like I said, it was handled with so much sensitivity and balance. So kudos to you. So Farzana, it was wonderful as always. Very, very lovely talking to you. And thank you IAAC for hosting